In the fading blush of twilight, a transaction unfolded that would alter destinies. A lonely rancher, Elias, stood in the dim haze of a shack behind the feed store, where the air hung heavy with the scent of sweat and kerosene. What had he stumbled into, this man of solitude, as he witnessed a young woman, Clara, bound by iron cuffs, her wrists raw and red from her own mother's cruel grip just an hour before? Her swollen belly, 8 months heavy with life, rose and fell with labored breaths as she crouched on the cold dirt floor, her gaze averted, shielding her shame or perhaps her fury. Elias's voice sliced through the oppressive stillness, low and gravel-worn, carrying the weight of endless weary days. "She needs a doctor, doesn't she?" he rasped, not with anger or tenderness, but with a bone-deep exhaustion. The older woman, Clara's mother, sneered, her weathered lips twisting as she shifted in her mud-caked boots. "A husband's what she needs, not some quack with a knife," she spat, her words sharp as thorns. "A man like you should know better." Elias's eyes drifted past Clara, fixed on some unseen specter in the splintered wooden walls. "I don't need a wife," he murmured, almost to himself. "I need peace." The deal was struck in near silence, a pitiful trade of 2 tarnished silver coins, a jug of whiskey, and a promise of half a butchered steer come autumn. With a callous flick, the mother freed Clara's wrists, as if discarding a worthless burden, and shoved her toward the door with a harsh whisper. "Don't cause him grief. He paid more than you're worth." Elias kept his distance, merely nodding toward the sweat-slicked horse waiting outside. Clara mounted with agonizing slowness, her eyes aflame with unshed tears, her throat tight with swallowed sobs. Their journey to his isolated homestead unfolded without a word, save for the mournful howl of the wind. 3 miles of dust-clogged trails and pine-shadowed paths stretched before them, the darkness seeming to pulse with secrets. His home loomed at the edge of oblivion. No neighbors, no boundaries, just untamed wilderness and a solitary porch standing sentinel against the void. Continuing from the haunting stillness of the night, the house stood as a somber relic, its walls seemingly unacquainted with joy for years untold. Elias guided Clara down with a gentle hand, gesturing toward the weathered door. Stepping inside, the air struck her as unnaturally pristine, devoid of life's usual traces. No lingering tobacco, no hint of fragrance, just the sharp tang of wood smoke mingled with the faint zest of lemon oil. Above the mantel, a lone photograph hung askew, capturing a woman whose eyes shone with a forgotten light, her hands tenderly clutching a baby blanket, though the child it once held was nowhere to be seen. "You may rest here," Elias murmured, indicating a small room to the left. "The bed is sturdy. There's water near the stove. I'll always knock before entering." Clara remained silent, her fingers brushing the secret seam of her boot where a slender blade lay hidden, stitched in with desperate care days before. With a single curt nod, she crossed the threshold. The room carried the faint aroma of lavender, undercut by the mustiness of dust. A quilt, far too exquisite for the humble surroundings, draped the bed, while a brush, a mirror, and a pair of untouched shoes stood in orderly silence by the dresser. It was no cell, yet the weight of confinement pressed against her chest. Deep into the night, as coyotes wailed their mournful songs to the heavens, Clara lay sleepless, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other gripping the dagger's cold hilt. The baby stirred within her, stealing her breath. She strained for any sound, footsteps, whispers, but heard only the wind's restless sigh and the groan of ancient beams. Near midnight, she eased from beneath the quilt, her movements ghostly to avoid betraying creaks. The knife, though small, gleamed with lethal intent as she drew it free. Barefoot, she glided toward the front room, her pulse thundering. Darkness and silence reigned. Her heart roared in her ears as she stepped onto the porch, where a thin, icy rain murmured against the earth. Then she saw him, Elias, not asleep, not spying, but kneeling on the damp wooden slats, an oil lamp flickering weakly by his side as he wove fresh leather with steady, deliberate hands. What secrets did this man guard under the weeping sky? As the echoes of the previous night lingered, Elias hunched over a battered saddle, its leather torn and weary. His brow creased with fierce focus, his hands moved with unwavering precision. Rain drenched his shirt, trickled down his matted hair, yet he remained oblivious to the world beyond his task. He murmured softly, words meant for no one, lost in the rhythm of repair. Clara, watching from the shadows, recalled how she'd often said this place ached for healing, more than just the broken fence. Oh, so much more. She stood rooted to the spot, a knife dangling uselessly at her side, her heart a storm of unspoken things. When his eyes finally met hers, all he offered was a quiet confession. He couldn't sleep. She shook her head, a silent reply, and with a single nod, he turned back to the saddle, stitching through the hush of the rain-soaked night. Later, in the sanctuary of her room, Clara slipped the knife beneath her pillow, not from trust, not yet, but from a tangled emotion, softer than dread, yet still sharp with uncertainty. Come morning, she found bread and blackberry jam waiting on the table. No words, no inquiries, just a quiet offering, a silence that didn't weigh heavy for once, but simply rested. Sunlight poured through the delicate lace curtains of the room Elias had given her, painting golden patterns on the hand-stitched quilt. Clara sat up, inhaling the lingering aroma of dried lavender, woven with deeper notes of cedar, faded rose petals, and the weight of years. This room, untouched by time, held relics of a life paused, a hoop of unfinished embroidery on the windowsill, its thread unraveling like a forsaken vow, and a worn book of psalms, pages thinned by countless prayers. On the far wall, a portrait hung askew, capturing a woman no older than Clara, her dark hair pinned with care, her gaze neither joyful nor sorrowful, but patiently expectant. Elias never crossed this threshold, yet each dawn warm cornbread appeared outside her door. The kettle hummed on the stove, and some days firewood stood neatly piled, or a mended dress lay folded at her bed's edge, silent gestures of care. What did these quiet acts mean in a house so steeped in unspoken history? His words were scarce, a mere nod as she drifted by. When night fell, the house sank into a profound stillness, broken only by the relentless tick of the mantel clock and the soft whisper of firewood crumbling into embers. Clara had known homes where shouts ricocheted off the walls, where hunger prowled restlessly, where silence sliced like a blade, heavy with rage. Yet this quiet was something else entirely. It didn't glare at her with mistrust. It allowed her to draw breath, to simply be. One dreary afternoon, as the wind veered and ominous clouds huddled over the valley, a sudden sharp rap at the door jolted Clara. She stood by the open window, peeling carrots, when Elias swung the door wide before she could even stir. There, framed in the doorway, was a woman cloaked in a somber black bonnet, her boots encrusted with mud, her jaw clenched like granite. "Martha," Elias greeted, his tone steady as a rock. "I've come for eggs," the woman barked, her gaze slithering past him to land on Clara. "And to get a look at this girl you've dragged in." Instinctively, Clara recoiled, her rounded belly impossible to conceal beneath the shawl. "Well, well," Martha sneered, hands planted on her hips. "Isn't she bursting at the seams, hardly more than a child herself, yet swollen like a harvest gourd? What's this, Elias? Is the town too dull without a bit of gossip to chew on?" Elias remained an unyielding statue. "She your little plaything now?" Martha spat venomously. "Didn't waste a heartbeat, did you? Barely laid your wife to rest. And here you are with some ragged waif from the lowlands. Always had a taste for the young, didn't you?" Clara stood frozen, the knife in her grip quivering. But Elias merely stared at the woman, his jaw a tight line. "Eggs, you say?" He replied coolly. "Take them." He turned, strode to the kitchen, and returned with a modest basket. He extended it silently. Martha snatched it, her eyes still scorching into Clara. "She won't endure, mark my words." Filth never does. Yet Elias held his tongue, stepping back with a single hand poised in quiet defiance. As the door shut with a soft, deliberate click, the sound lingered in the heavy stillness that enveloped the room. Clara stood rooted to the spot long after Martha's departure, her hand cradling the gentle swell of her belly where her unborn child shifted restlessly. She yearned for Elias to speak, to shatter the silence with an explanation, a heartfelt apology, or a fervent denial of the cruel words that had pierced her, but no words came. Instead, he retreated to the porch, settling into the weathered wooden rocker, his hands busy with a piece of cedar, his eyes averted. He hadn't stood by her side. He hadn't refuted the accusations. He had simply closed the door on her pain. That night, Clara perched on the edge of the bed, her brush gliding through her hair as she gazed into the mirror. Behind her reflection, the portrait of the other woman, his wife, stared back, a silent sentinel of the past. Unbidden, Clara murmured to the image, her voice barely a breath. "He fears their judgment more than mine." In that moment, a bitter truth crystallized in her heart. Elias hadn't rescued her out of kindness. He had claimed her because he no longer believed in his own redemption, because phantoms of memory were safer than living souls, because silence couldn't condemn him. But Clara was no specter. She pulsed with life, and so would her child. Outside, the wind roared like a wild beast, clawing at the shutters and seeping through the floorboards with icy tendrils, seeking warmth it could not find. Clara lay in bed, eyes wide, every muscle taut. Each groan of the old house deepened her disquiet. Had it truly been only 2 weeks since her mother traded her away like a mere commodity? Elias kept his distance, his words sparse, but the silence no longer felt like a shield. It loomed like a noose, slowly tightening. Unable to bear it, she rose in the dark, slipping into the long coat Elias had left draped on the hook, her movements hushed and deliberate. Continuing from the shadows of her resolve, Clara felt the cold steel of the blade hidden in her boot, a constant, chilling reminder that liberty demanded sacrifice. She tugged on heavy socks, draped her shawl snugly around her shoulders, and slipped out through the back door into the unforgiving night. The icy air struck her face with brutal force, a harsh awakening to her desperate flight. Snowflakes danced down swiftly, veiling the broken stone path beneath a frosty shroud. Undeterred, she forged ahead, the wind howling in protest, her jaw set firm against the piercing chill, each step a muted crunch in the silent storm. Her destination was unknown, driven only by an urgent need to escape. To flee the oppressive silence of that house, the suffocating presence of a man who spoke no words, the insidious murmurs that haunted every corner, and the lingering specter of a woman whose memory tainted the very air of that bedroom. Yet a sudden, searing pain in her side halted her escape. She gasped, clutching the nearest railing for support, her body betraying her at this critical moment. Another wave of agony, deeper and more fierce, forced her to her knees, the snow biting into her skin as she collapsed. Her breaths came in ragged, misty bursts into the frigid darkness. "No," she whispered desperately, her hand trembling over the taut swell of her belly. "Not now, I beg you." Then the sound of hurried, heavy footsteps shattered the quiet. Elias's voice, raw with concern, pierced the night. "Clara!" She couldn't respond, overwhelmed by another surge of pain. Suddenly, his strong arms were beneath her, lifting her effortlessly, her shivering frame pressed against the damp wool of his coat. Without a word, he bore her back into the house, past the flickering warmth of the fire, and into the comforting embrace of the quilted bed. Kneeling beside her, his face reddened by the cold, he rested a rough, weathered hand on her stomach. His voice, when it finally broke the silence, trembled with emotion. "Do not let your child perish for the sake of cruel tongues." His words crashed over her like a storm in a still night. She gazed at him, her eyes wide, unable to tear her stare away. How could she reconcile this unexpected tenderness with the weight of her fears? In that fleeting, raw moment, Elias shed the cloak of the quiet man who dodged every probing question. He became someone else entirely, a soul who bore the heavy imprint of loss, a mirror to unspoken grief. As the sharp edge of pain softened and Clara's ragged breaths steadied, she broke her long-held silence, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the stillness. Gazing into the hearth where flames danced with restless energy, she spoke of a past she'd buried deep. Her mother had demanded she serve drinks, she murmured, to pour whiskey with a painted smile, to perch on laps as if her heart weren't breaking. The miners tossed more coin for a pretty face after all. Her fingers tightened around the quilt's edge, knuckles whitening. "I dared to say no, just once," she whispered, her voice trembling. For that defiance, her mother confined her to the goat shed. 2 endless nights of cold and fear. After that, resistance died within her. Elias remained wordless, his gaze locked on the fire, shoulders rigid with unspoken tension. Clara pressed on, her words a quiet confession. She had fled, finding refuge in Dry Creek, washing sheets at a boarding house. There she met him, the father. He was gentle until he wasn't, she said, her eyes seeking Elias's face. Does he even know? Does she even wish him to? Elias offered only a slow, solemn nod before rising to place a new log on the fire, leaving her to the embrace of rest. Yet sleep was a fickle visitor. Clara drifted through fractured dreams, her mother's harsh tone, the stench of whiskey, the oppressive weight of a stranger's breath. Past midnight, a sound pierced the haze, faint yet soul-wrenching, a cry. Her breath snagged as she sat bolt upright. The baby? No, the sound echoed from beyond her room. Barefoot, she crept toward it, halting at the hallway's end. Through the open door, moonlight spilled over Elias, seated by the front window, its silver glow etching sorrow into his features. Cradled in his hands was a tiny dress, a fragile relic of a pain too vast to name. A fragile pink dress, hand-stitched with care, as tender as a whispered breath, rested in his weathered hands. He cradled it with the reverence one reserves for a cherished memory, fearful that a single misstep might shatter it. "She made it after the third," Elias murmured, his voice soft as a shadow, his gaze fixed elsewhere. Still clung to the hope that the next time would be different. Clara edged closer, her words barely audible, trembling in the heavy air. "The third? What do you mean?" His reply came like a stone dropping into still water. "The third loss. She endured 7. I laid each one to rest behind the ridge. Boys, girls, we never gave them names." His finger traced the delicate hem of the tiny garment, a gesture of unspoken grief. "I buried this dress after the 7th. I couldn't bear to see it any longer." Clara stood motionless, the weight of a sorrow too vast for words pressing down on her. In that piercing silence, understanding bloomed. He hadn't barricaded himself from the world out of cruelty, but because the world had stripped away every fragment of love he dared to hold. Could anyone endure such relentless theft of the heart? The next morning, after a night of quiet tears, the snow had largely melted, exposing the brittle brown grass beneath. From the kitchen window, Clara watched Elias saddle his horse with his usual measured precision, yet something felt altered. The silence between them, once laced with fear and doubt, had transformed into a shared ache. After he rode toward town, Clara draped her shawl over her shoulders and ventured outside. The wind had gentled, the air moist with the thaw. She traced the narrow path behind the barn, her boots crunching on half-frozen earth, past the chicken coop and the splintered fence. The trail drew her farther than she'd ever wandered, through a sparse grove of pine and up a gentle slope where the trees thinned and the sky unfurled. At the ridge's crest, she saw them 7 weathered markers, uneven and solemn, lined up like silent, forgotten pleas. No names, only echoes of what might have been. How could such small graves carry such immense pain? 9. Following the haunting echoes of the past, Clara stumbled upon numbers carved roughly into the ancient, wind-worn wood, each gouge a silent cry from a forgotten story. Her breath hitched, a sharp pang in her chest, as she dropped to her knees before the final marker, the 7th. The soil beneath was fresher, raw, as if the earth itself still mourned. Sparse grass fought to take root, and a lone wildflower, frail and bowed by the relentless chill, rested against the marker, a fragile mourner in the desolate scene. Trembling, Clara extended her hand, fingertips brushing the wood, and to her astonishment, it felt warm, impossibly so, as if it held the lingering pulse of life. In that moment, tears spilled over, not from fear or isolation, but from the crushing weight of understanding. The silence she had once feared as hostile, the grief she had misjudged as malice, it all unraveled before her. Elias was not the monster the village painted in hushed, fearful tones. He was a soul who had buried 7 fragments of his heart in this lonely grove. Her sobs were for them, for him, for her own aching spirit. She didn't sense his presence until she turned, and there he stood at the grove's edge, hat clutched in weathered hands, his gaze impenetrable. He remained still, wordless, observing her with the wary intensity of someone gazing at a flame drawn to its warmth, yet fearing its burn. "I thought you killed her," Clara murmured, her voice raw with emotion. "I thought they said—" "I know what they say," Elias cut in, his tone gentle yet heavy. "And I let them. Why fight when silence costs less?" His eyes wandered to the markers, then returned to her. "Each one stole a piece of her, of me. By the 7th, we were hollow." Clara rose, her fingers grazing the rough edge of the wooden cross. "She tried planting roses here," he added, almost to himself. "They never took. Soil's too poor. Wind strips the petals bare. Could there be hope yet?" "Maybe this spring," Clara ventured softly, "we try again." For the first time, a shadow of something disbelief, perhaps, flickered across his stoic face. Then, with a single solemn nod, he sealed the fragile pact between them. As if carried by an unspoken understanding, their conversation lingered in the air, much like a man's subtle nod when a truth he didn't know he craved finally reaches his ears. They remained on that ridge a little longer, under a sky that whispered of lingering frost before the embrace of warmth. The ridge held a sanctity not of stone altars or stained glass, but of anguish etched into memory, revered in quiet reverence. Then, without a murmur, they descended together, their paces deliberate, measured, and matched, side by side, as if bound by an invisible thread. Time unfurled its slow magic, and the days stretched longer. The snow, once a relentless captor, began to loosen its icy grip on the land. Defiant sprigs of green pierced through the still hardened soil, daring winter to linger. The sky shed its dreary gray shroud, revealing a faint, hopeful blue, a herald of spring's timid approach. Within the walls of their home, a transformation stirred, not with clamor, but with the softest of whispers. Clara no longer lingered indoors, waiting for Elias to venture out alone. Instead, she stepped into the crisp air beside him, tugging on gloves, steadying nails as he repaired the south fence, or passing him weathered boards to mend the woodshed's sagging roof. Her gait bore a slight limp now, the growing weight of her belly evident with each passing week, yet her movements carried an unshakable resolve. At midday, she prepared meals with care golden corn, hearty stewed beans, and tender rabbit Elias had snared at dawn. Sometimes he spoke, but more often he listened. Each evening, as the fire snapped and the sky melted from amber to deep indigo, Clara's voice filled the room, reading from the tattered Bible perched in the kitchen hutch, its pages worn thin by countless hands. She read with deliberation, pausing to ponder aloud. What could it mean, she mused, when it speaks of sorrow enduring for a night, yet joy arriving with the morning? Elias, shaping a spoon from hickory in his rocking chair, answered without lifting his gaze. It means you sometimes must let go of something to truly grasp what's worth holding. One quiet afternoon, Clara stood near the porch, watching Elias tend to his tasks, her presence a silent testament to their shared journey. As the conversation from the previous moment lingered in the air, Clara's gaze drifted to the uneven row of wooden stakes tracing the weathered fence. The earth around them was freshly churned, a deep, rich brown, as if it held secrets just beneath the surface. Half buried beside each stake, delicate bulbs rested, waiting for a chance at life. "You're planting roses again," she murmured, her voice a mix of wonder and curiosity as she edged closer. Elias lifted his eyes briefly, dragging a worn rag across his dirt-streaked hands. "They never take root. Not once," he admitted, his tone heavy with resignation. Clara lowered herself beside a stake, her knees bending slowly, her fingers pressing tenderly into the cool soil. "Then why persist?" she asked, her words hanging like a fragile thread between them. He shrugged, a gesture laden with unspoken weight. "Because she believed they would. She always said even the most unyielding earth softens with enough patience." His voice dipped, softer now. "And you," Clara pressed, searching his face. He paused, then met her gaze with raw honesty. "I never believed it myself, but I kept planting them because when she looked out and saw them, even the ones that withered, she smiled as if they'd burst into bloom." Clara felt a tightness in her chest, a quiet ache. She reached for a stake, her hands gently turning the soil to cover the bulb with care. "I think she was right," she whispered. Could stubborn hope truly coax life from barren ground? That night, as the wind sighed against the window panes and the stove's warmth enveloped the room like a tender embrace, Clara sat at the table, her hand resting on her swelling belly. The baby stirred beneath her touch, a steady, defiant rhythm. "If it's a girl," she said, her voice barely above a breath, "I'll name her Rose." Elias glanced up from his whittling, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "She'll be stubborn," Clara continued, a faint smile curving her lips. "She'll thrive where no one expects, even if it takes years." Elias set his carving down, his nod slow but resolute. "That's a strong name," he said, "and an even stronger hope." The silence that settled between them was no longer a barrier, but a shared space, like a field lying in wait for seeds to awaken, like the fragile pause between a heartbeat and a sigh. For the first time in weeks, Clara's dreams were free of the mining town's shadows, her mother's harsh hands, and the lingering scent of despair. The scent of whiskey lingered on a stranger's worn coat, a fleeting memory in Clara's mind as her dreams painted brighter pictures. She saw sunlight piercing through delicate rose petals, casting a warm glow. She felt tiny hands tugging at her braid with innocent urgency. And there was Elias. Oh, how he smiled, not just with his lips, but with every fiber of his being. A little girl, her cheeks smudged with earth, darted through a field of wildflowers, chasing chickens with unrestrained laughter. In this vision, the roses didn't bloom in flawless unison. They unfurled slowly, imperfectly, yet it was enough to fill her heart with quiet hope. That night, a strange wind swept through, hot and arid, carrying an eerie stillness that hushed even the restless coyotes. Above the ridge, the sky churned into a deep, wounded purple, and thunder grumbled like an ancient drum of warning from the heavens. Elias stood on the weathered porch, his gaze fixed on the shadowy mountains in the distance. A jagged bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, illuminating the horizon, followed by a thunderclap so fierce it seemed to shatter the very sky. Then came the acrid, scent-sharp, bitter smoke that stung the senses. Clara, arranging dishes on the table with care, froze as a faint haze slipped through the open window. Her breath caught, nostrils twitching with alarm. Inside her, the baby stirred uneasily, as if it too sensed the creeping dread. Suddenly, Elias stormed through the door, urgency in his voice. "There's a fire!" he barked, already grabbing blankets. "Up at Briar Ridge. The wind's pushing it toward us." Clara hurried to the doorway, peering at the tree line. On the far slope, flames danced like furious stars plummeting to the earth. "We have to go," Elias urged, dunking cloths into a bucket of water. "The old stone hut on the north trail. It's our safest bet." Clara nodded, her pulse hammering in her chest. But as she turned to snatch her coat, a searing pain shot through her spine, bending her over with a gasp. "Elias!" she cried, gripping the table's edge for support. In an instant, he was beside her, eyes wide with fear. "It's time," she whispered, dread clawing at her throat. "The baby." Another contraction struck, fiercer than before, stealing her breath away. As the inferno closed in, Clara's breath came in ragged gasps, each one laced with the acrid bite of smoke. The air grew dense, suffocating as flames devoured the distance. Elias, unwavering in the face of chaos, acted with fierce resolve. He plunged 2 worn blankets into a bucket of water, draping one over Clara's trembling shoulders and the other around his own. With a tenderness that belied the urgency, he scooped her into his powerful arms, her swollen belly pressed safely against his chest. "Hold tight," he urged, his voice a steady anchor in the storm, before smashing the door open with a determined kick. Outside, the world blazed in a surreal, apocalyptic orange. Ash drifted like mournful snowflakes, while the wind howled across the scorched field, flinging fiery embers in its wake. The path to the ancient stone hut snaked through a tight ravine, clogged with brittle undergrowth, a feast for the ravenous flames. Yet Elias knew every twist of this treacherous trail. His boots pounded the parched earth, his breath sharp and staccato as he raced against the encroaching fire. Clara's pained cry pierced the chaos as another contraction seized her. "I can't!" she sobbed, desperation cracking her voice. "I can't go on." Elias's response was ironclad, his jaw set. "You can, Clara. You must. Just breathe. Cling to me." The fire pursued them, a merciless predator, as trees along the ridge exploded into fiery bursts. Smoke surged into the ravine, a dark, choking wave. Clara pressed her face into Elias's chest, seeking refuge from the searing heat, the terror, the agony. Each step jarred her fragile frame. Each breath burned with the taste of ruin. Just as darkness threatened to claim her, they stumbled upon salvation, the weathered stone hut, carved into the hillside, a relic of resilience. Once it had cradled new life within its walls, a sanctuary of forgotten hopes. Elias burst through the door, gently lowering Clara onto the straw-littered floor. The thick, cool stone embraced them, a defiant barrier against the inferno's wrath. With swift precision, he arranged the damp blankets beneath her, fetched water from a stored barrel, and ignited a faint oil lamp. Beyond the walls, the fire's roar raged on, but here, within this ancient refuge, its fury was dulled to a distant growl. As the echo of distant thunder rumbled ominously, Clara's piercing scream shattered the tense air, another brutal wave of pain crashing over her. Shore. Her frail body trembled and folded under the strain, her fingers gripping Elias's hand with desperate strength, nails carving into his skin. "I'm so afraid," she breathed, her voice a fragile thread. Kneeling beside her, Elias's own fear mirrored hers, yet he steadied himself. "I am too," he admitted softly, "but you're not alone in this storm." Time blurred hours or mere fleeting minutes. It was impossible to discern. Agony melded into agony, relentless and consuming. Elias, ever by her side, gently wiped the sweat from her brow, murmuring words of courage, anchoring her through every wrenching moan and sob. 7 times before, he had witnessed the cruel shadow of death steal life in childbirth, but this time he waged a silent war against it. For Clara, he would not yield. Then a sudden hush fell, heavy and expectant, broken by Clara's final guttural cry, raw, fierce, unyielding. And in its wake, over the restless howl of wind and the crackle of brittle underbrush, a new sound pierced the night, a high, vibrant wail. A baby's cry flooded the humble hut with the undeniable pulse of life. Clara's breath hitched, her body quaking as tears of relief and joy cascaded down her cheeks. Elias, trembling himself, carefully lifted the tiny ruddy bundle, swaddling it tenderly before placing it in her waiting arms. "A girl," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Clara's laughter mingled with her sobs as she embraced her child. "Rose," she named her, the word a tender vow. "My little Rose." Outside, the once raging fire waned, its embers cooling. Inside, a new flame of life ignited. Dawn's first golden rays slipped through the crevices of the stone walls, bathing the space in a soft, hopeful glow, carrying the mingled scents of charred earth and fresh beginnings. The inferno had passed in the night, its wrath now mere wisps of smoke curling on the distant horizon. Yet its bitter trace lingered, clinging to their skin, a ghostly reminder in every breath. But within these walls, something radiant had blossomed. Rose's cries rang out once more, bold and insistent. Not a frail whimper, but a fierce declaration of existence. Her voice reverberated against the ancient stone, a sacred melody unlike any sound that had ever graced this forsaken place in a decade. Could this be the herald of renewal, a defiant song of survival against all odds? After the heavy silence that had lingered for endless years, a single piercing cry shattered it into fragments, ushering in a new dawn. Elias sank to his knees beside Clara, his hands marred with soot and blood, his broad shoulders quaking, not with dread, but with a raw, unguarded relief that threatened to unravel him. His breaths came in jagged, uneven bursts, as though he, too, had emerged anew alongside the child. He gazed at Clara, who clutched the tiny, wriggling newborn to her chest with arms that trembled from exertion. Her face, ghostly pale and etched with fatigue, shimmered with an almost ethereal awe. Smudges of dirt streaked her cheeks, beads of sweat clung to her brow, yet her eyes, oh, her eyes burned with a fierce, untamed fire. The infant, still glistening from the chaos of birth, squirmed restlessly, blindly seeking warmth, sustenance, the familiar cadence of a mother's voice. Her tiny fingers stretched and curled in the air, delicate as petals catching the first light of morning. Clara lifted her tear-streaked gaze to Elias, her voice a fragile whisper, breaking under the weight of emotion. "She's strong, isn't she?" Elias, his own voice rough and strained, managed a faint, fleeting smile. "She's loud," he rasped, the hard lines of his face softening for a heartbeat, revealing a glimpse of the man he once was, before grief had etched its cruel signature into his soul. With a hesitant hand, trembling as though nearing something divine, he reached out. His fingertip grazed the baby's cheek skin, so tender, so impossibly soft, like silk kissed by the glow of a hearth. She blinked, her newborn eyes still clouded, and released a yawn so small, so achingly human, it pierced straight through him. "Rose," he breathed, the name a quiet revelation. "She'll be Rose." Clara drew the child closer, her lips brushing the damp, fragile hair. "You named her," she murmured. "No," Elias replied, his voice low, almost reverent. "You did, I only see it now." His frame slumped, burdened by a weight only he could name. As the echoes of the harrowing moments lingered, Clara slumped against the ancient stone wall, her strength waning. A ghostly veil of smoke seeped once more through the crevices, pale and insidious, wrapping its tendrils around them as if reluctant to release its grip. Elias's visage was a mask of ash, his once vibrant skin dulled to a somber gray. His lips, parched and fissured, spoke of silent suffering, while his eyes, once so full of fire, now flickered with a dim, weary light. Clara's fleeting smile dissolved into despair. "Elias?" she called, her voice a fragile thread of hope. When no reply came, she raised her tone, desperation clawing up her spine. "Elias!" The infant cradled against her. Little Rose let out a soft, anxious whimper, as if mirroring her mother's dread. Silence answered her plea. With a quivering hand, Clara reached out, her fingers encircling his forearm, too slack, unnaturally so. In a heartbreaking instant, he crumpled to the ground, lifeless as a puppet severed from its master's strings. "No, no, Elias!" Her cry shattered the oppressive quiet as she shifted Rose to one arm and dragged herself to his side. Her knees grazed the unforgiving stone, her heartbeat thundering so fiercely it eclipsed all reason. "Look at me! You have to stay with me, do you hear?" He lay motionless. Desperately, she pressed her ear to his chest, holding her breath until it ached. There, a faint, faltering rhythm, barely a whisper of life. "Please," she breathed, her forehead resting on his shoulder. "Don't leave us. Not now. Not when she's here." She shook him, once, twice, but he remained still. Then, Rose's cry pierced the air, a fierce, commanding wail that roared like a tempest. It wasn't mere fear or need. It was a summons, a demand for life. Elias gasped, his chest heaving with a sudden jagged breath. Then another, raw and scraping, but alive. His eyes fluttered open, dazed at first, until they locked onto Clara's tear-streaked face. "She's got lungs," he rasped, his voice a fragile thread of humor. Clara's laughter broke free, only to fracture into a sob. "So do you," she whispered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as his eyes drifted shut once more. "Guess I'll need them," he murmured. Beyond their shattered sanctuary, the fire's wrath faded into embers of memory, the smoke slowly rising, relinquishing its hold on their fragile refuge. As the echoes of past struggles lingered in the soot-stained remnants of the blackened hut, the trio clung to each other, enveloped in a profound stillness, their breaths mingling in the tender air of a miracle reborn. They were united not by lineage, but by the piercing cry of a child that christened hope, reviving a broken man, and by a solitary rose that dared to flourish amidst desolation. A year had passed, and the once silent dwelling now pulsed with vibrant life. The wooden fence, painstakingly restored, stood tall and resolute, draped in gentle vines and wild grasses that sprang anew with the spring showers. By the front window, a cradle of hand-smoothed cedar rested, a silent witness to a baby's first slumber, and now to her tentative, toddling steps toward independence. Outside, the rose bushes beside the porch unfurled their blooms, not in flawless abundance, but with enough quiet defiance. Their soft pink petals stretched toward the sun, embodying a fragile yet fierce beauty, thriving where despair once reigned supreme. Within the walls, the kitchen resounded with laughter, a melody of healing. Clara stirred a simmering stew, her hum a gentle lullaby, while little Rose babbled on the floor, wielding a wooden spoon as if it were a royal decree. At the table, Elias mended a doll's tattered limb with the same meticulous care he once reserved for crafting saddles and stitching soles. Letters arrived, bound in blue ribbons or nestled among baskets of cornbread and peach preserves, some bearing apologies, others blessings, all from lips that once spat venom. Handmade quilts, socks, and even a child's scrawled note of remorse for a mother's harsh words found their way to the doorstep. On balmy evenings, the porch transformed into a sanctuary of tentative reconciliation. Neighbors, initially hesitant, brought pies and shared forgotten tales. Clara, ever gracious, never questioned their motives, simply offering tin cups and an open heart. One radiant morning, with Rose perched on her hip, Clara pointed to the blossoming flowers, whispering of beauty born from ashes. How could such fragile petals carry the weight of so much redemption? As the conversation lingered by the weathered fence, Clara's voice softened with a tender warmth. "She called you Bay yesterday," she said, her smile blooming like a fragile dawn. Elias arched a brow, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes, before Clara let out two bright bursts of laughter. I counted each one as if they were precious notes in a melody. His own chuckle followed, that quiet, familiar sound that still tugged at her heart with a sweet, aching pull. "She's a clever little thing," he murmured. Clara's gaze deepened, her words carrying a weight beyond their simplicity. "She's yours." Elias reached out, his rough hand brushing the child's soft cheek with a reverence that spoke volumes. "Ours," he corrected, his voice a quiet vow. That evening, as the sun dissolved into a molten amber glow over the valley, little Rose toddled barefoot through the yard. Her golden curls bobbed with every unsteady step, one tiny, chubby hand gripping the stem of a freshly picked rose. A butterfly fluttered by, and she squealed in pure, unbridled joy, only to stumble and rise again, her spirit unbroken. From the porch, Clara watched, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly, a new life stirring within. Elias stood at her side, his steady hand on her back, a silent anchor. The land surrounding them, once charred and desolate, now pulsed with green, imperfect, hard-won, but vibrantly alive. As Rose dashed into the shimmering golden light, petals from her rose scattering behind her like whispered promises, Clara's voice trembled with quiet wonder. Some things must be surrendered to pave the way for miracles. Can you imagine? Even in a place reduced to ashes, flowers dare to bloom. Her words hung in the air, a testament to the impossible beauty unfurling before them. Don't miss out. Tap that bell to ensure you're always here for tales where bullets flew wide, yet hearts struck true. Can a story change your perspective? Thank you for joining this journey with us. We can't wait to share the next chapter with you. Comment, like, share, and subscribe to stay connected.